Record, I'm pressing. Yeah, we're good. So Jimmy Sheehan, board member of NET Ministries Ireland, you're very welcome to this interview. And I'm very privileged as director of NET Ministries to have a chat with you just about your life and your involvement with NET Ministries and what you see in NET Ministries. But it's mostly, to be honest, to do with you. And you're an amazing man. You've inspired me, and it's been a real privilege for me to watch you and to learn from you, really. And you mightn't have realized the effect that you're having, but I just want to say that to you. It's been a tremendous opportunity and privilege for me in my life to get to spend time with you and to learn from you. So you're very welcome, Jimmy.
Listen, you're very good, Tony, and thank you for your comments. It embarrasses me to think that I've had any influence on anybody, you know. Thank you for saying so.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's a great pleasure to talk to you today.
Thank you very much. So let's just dive right in. Each person's history has a big effect on who they are. And it doesn't matter what age we are. I'm 50 years of age now. I know you're a little bit older than me. But what was your own family upbringing like, if you were to describe that, you know, in terms of your own life as a child and growing up in your family?
Well, you're very kind to say I'm a little bit older than you. I'm 30 years older than you. So when you go back to my childhood years, things were very different to what people are being brought up with now. That goes back 80 years when I was born. And I remember the end of the war. So that was 1945. I was 6 years of age then. And in fact, I remember the war itself because bombs were dropped quite close to where we lived in error by a German plane, and they killed a number of people a few miles away from us. So, you know, times were very different, and times were very stark at the end of the war. Mm-hmm. So when I grew up in my younger years, life was very simple compared to how sophisticated it is now. We'd no television in our home. My father had an ancient radio, and I remember him listening to Winston Churchill's broadcasts of the war at the time. Mm-hmm. So and he had his ear glued up in order to try and get any sort of transmission from the old radio. Mm-hmm. So we were brought up in a very simple way, really. And when I look back at it, we had many blessings because there was none of the sophistication of modern media. I was the second of 5 in the family, and I think you know, times in those years were very frugal as well. There was rationing of supplies for a good few years after the war, you know, with coupons to get butter and sugar and the ordinary basic commodities of life. The children nowadays just wouldn't believe what it was like. So mm-hmm. As a result, our whole atmosphere at home was very basic. Mm-hmm. I remember when we subsequently, in my latter years at home, we got our first television, and that was a huge sort of innovation in Ireland at the time, watching TV. So as a family, we were very much together as a family because we didn't have any outside influences. I think my father and my mother had a huge influence on us.
And I know you were born, I believe, in Kerry, but your family was living in Dublin. It just happened to be at a time whenever you were down visiting. Is that true?
But both my parents were from their parents were from Kerry. Mm-hmm. So my mother was actually on holidays with her father when I arrived prematurely, and as a result was born in Kerry. And I claim to be a Kerry man when it suits me. Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I heard you say that.
If not, when I come.
So you talked. We might come back to this later about what it was like, because I think there are similarities between what we're going through now with COVID-19 and, you know, growing up at a time when you remember the war. But there was a culture in the society at the time that was simpler Was there a culture that you would say in your family growing up? I'm not specifically talking about faith, which we'll get to, but what, how would you say, I think at least 3 of your family became doctors. There's obviously a lot of ability there. Was that something that was assumed, or was it something that you chose for yourselves?
Well, the culture that I was brought up with was that my father put a huge emphasis on education, because he himself never got the opportunity of third level education, because when he had just left school, his father had a stroke, and my father was the eldest in the family and had to support the family. So he went to work at a very early age, and he always regretted he was never able to go on to third level education. And as a result, he put a huge emphasis on the fact that we would all automatically, it was taken for granted that we would actually go to third level. It wasn't that we were pushed into it, but it was just a natural transition after school. My sister, before me, did medicine. She was 2 years older than me, the eldest in the family. And I suppose I never gave a great thought to doing anything other than medicine, and I don't know why, but I was always keen to do medicine from a young age. I never had any exposure to it. I'd never spent any time in hospital. In those days in school, you were never exposed to transition year type exposures that children now have. But I just liked the idea of going into medicine, and it just happened then that my brother after me and my youngest sister also did medicine. The only member of the family who didn't did pharmacy. Now, our background was very much in pharmacy because all my uncles and relatives were pharmacists, as was my grandfather. So I suppose there was a certain similarity, if you like, between pharmacy and medicine. And I would imagine if I didn't do medicine, I would have become a pharmacist. No, I never discussed it, and it was interesting because when I see children nowadays with all the opportunities they get for counselling and for career guidance, in my time I never actually discussed with my father and my parents what I would like to do or what I would do, and they never asked me what I'd like to do. And after I got my leaving cert, which was a basic leaving cert, at that time you could do anything you wanted, just wanted the basic leaving cert. My father said to me, what would you like to do? And I said, I'd like to do medicine. And he said, that's fine by me. He said, I thought you might like to do engineering. And as it happened, I did engineering subsequently through medicine because of the bioengineering aspects. But that was the extent of my discussion and counselling. And I look back and I marvel at how little advice there was in those days. When you choose a career at my stage as well, there are very few career opportunities open to you. Like if you didn't do medicine, there was law, there was a very small range of professional involvements in life at that time. So that medicine would have been one of the sort of areas that people graduated into.
Okay. And would you describe yourself like would you describe yourself as driven? Were you always driven? It sounds like you wanted to do medicine and you went for it, and did you work hard? Did it come naturally to you? Was it a bit of both?
Well, I wouldn't say so much I was that driven, but I was very conscious of the opportunity of getting to third level, because my father had a very mundane job. He worked in the Dublin Port and Docks Board in the secretarial area in a very mundane job, and I'd say with a very meagre type of income as well at that stage. And sorry for the phone in the background.
That's all right.
But when I left school and he gave me the opportunity of going into medicine, he was stretched, I'm sure, to pay the fees and to have me in medicine. And I worked every hour of the day and night that I got in my first year in medicine, because I was afraid I couldn't make the grade and that I'd disappoint him. I spent a huge amount of time studying because there were some very bright people in the class. So I spent every moment of the day and night studying in the first year in case I wouldn't make the grade, because when we entered medicine, anyone could go into medicine who wished to go. But there was no limit to the numbers who went in. But the first day that we had a lecture, the lecturer came in and said, introduce yourself to the person on your right and the person on your left, because they won't be there next year. And that was the way that we were weeded out, that everyone went in, but only half those who ended the first year were accepted. And it was a very good system, really, because if you were interested, you were interested. And as a result, I was afraid I might be one of the ones who was sort of overlooked. So I spent all my time studying, and to my amazement, when it actually came to the final and we got our results, I was first in the class. And I couldn't believe that I was in that league, because there was a lot of people on scholarships and very bright people, and I was just an ordinary middle of the road guy going in. And that set a very high bar for me, because I then wanted to try and achieve that standard for the rest of my time in medicine, which put a huge strain on me. In fact, I enjoyed every moment of it, but I was under huge pressure in order to maintain that standard for the remaining 6 years. So I was driven indirectly that way. Yeah.
So with our 600 points in the Leaving Cert for medicine now, and you know, all that, the counselling and all the different options for people who want to consider it, would you say that the system back then had some advantages over what we do now, in terms of, you know, weeding out those who, if you're interested in it, you'll go for it, whereas if you have the points, you'll get it now?
Yeah, I think the system then was much better, and I'd love to see them going back to that type of system, where anybody who wants to do medicine, because I feel quite strongly about it, because as you know, when you look at the bell-shaped curve and you look at the sort of where people fall into that, nowadays we're selecting people from the right extremity of that curve, people who have very high points, high achievers, high IQ. At the other end of the curve, you have people with high emotional intelligence. And as a result, taking people into medicine who have very low emotional intelligence but high IQ. And medicine really requires people from the middle of the curve and the lower part of the curve, because most of medical care is relatively mundane. But we're not scientists, huge high achievers. We're looking after people at a very basic level. We need to be able to relate to people in a very simple way. We need empathy, and empathy is very often lacking in high achievers. So we're actually ending up with people in medicine who aren't very often suitable for the basic human contact that's required. And I'd love to see us reverting back to taking people throughout the bell-shaped curve. And having a better spread of people. Okay, if you take them throughout the curve, you'll get the scientists that you need at one end, but you'll get the people who have great empathy at the other end. And I think we'll be better off.
So say, what would you say to a young person now who is interested in a career in medicine? And you know, we've some people in our family, I won't mention any names, who are interested in going down that road, and you know, they're wondering whether they should, whether they shouldn't, long road ahead, all that type of thing, a lot of work. And then when they get into a career, they're looking at long hours and constant, a situation where in order to just keep up, it's going to be a constant learning just to keep up. Or is that just a myth? What advice would you give to a young person considering medicine?
Well, I would say to any person who has a lean towards medicine, I would say go for it and forget about the point system. If you're worried about the points and you don't get the points in the leaving, go in and do a basic science degree with biology maybe and physics and chemistry, and enter into the graduate programs, because entry as a graduate is much easier. And I think that the people I've seen going in as graduates are actually, they're more mature, they have a shorter medical course of 4 years as a graduate.
Mm-hmm.
So they're only adding an extra year, or at the very most 2 years onto the course.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that graduate programs are going to increase in years to come, because we're making a huge error the way we are with the points.
Okay.
And also too, from you sort of say after the continuous study and that, but in whatever career you go into, you're going to have continuous study nowadays. If you're in engineering or in accountancy, everything keeps changing. And you have to keep moving with the times, because I look back at my career now. When I started orthopedic surgery in 1964, and when I retired from surgery, not one single operation that I trained in the 1964 was applicable when I left surgery at the other end of the scale. So that your whole life is change.
Learning.
You know.
Yeah.
And was the Cardinal Newman said that, you know, to change often is, what was his quote? To change often is great, but to change frequently is wonderful. Something to that effect.
Mm-hmm.
The way we all have to adapt to change.
Mm. Good. Thank you for that. I might look that up, Cardinal Newman.
Yeah.
How important was faith in your home growing up, Jimmy? I know for us, we said the rosary, and we went, so the odd time we'd say it on our knees, but we said the rosary, and it was something that I felt it was good for us looking back. Was that a thing for you growing up?
Oh, it was very much on our knees. It was always a routine in the house. That there were two routines. My father and mother went to daily mass from the time they got a car, because the war years there were no cars on the road. The only people who had cars were people who were essential doctors and very limited group of people. So when they got their first car, they attended morning mass, because mass would have been about a few miles away at that stage. And we went to mass with them in the morning. So it was part of our life going to mass. We then came home and had breakfast. And then at the other end of the day, after dinner, we all knelt down and said the rosary. So that was very much part of our structure. And we accepted that as the norm rather than anything else. So that I was blessed in that we had that tranquility and, if you like, peacefulness in our home that brought to it. The natural transition in life.
So you guys went to mass when you were children every day after the war?
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. Fantastic. It was just acceptable. That was my father and mother's influence, really, and that was just taken as part of the day.
And whenever you left home, maybe you're in your 20s, did your faith just come with you, or was there ever a point where you had to decide, this is my faith now, and this is something that I want to do for myself, not because, my parents are saying the rosary, I want to say the rosary, you owned your own faith. Do you remember that time?
There was a natural transition. Well, I was late leaving home, and that I didn't leave home until I was qualified. So I was in my 20s at that stage. And in fact, I left home to get married. So I had to transition from home to marriage straight away. I never lived independently of home, if you like. So, but my faith practice was never different. And in school, I was privileged to have been with the Spirit and the Holy Ghost Fathers. And that they had a very profound effect on me, I'd say. That we were altar servers who were brought up with the Latin Mass. They had the Legion of Mary in school, which we became members of. And then as a past pupil, you transitioned into the past pupils branch of the Legion of Mary. And we were very involved with youth action. And so if you like, I wouldn't like to say that my religion was anything special. It was just part and parcel of the life that I was brought up in. So that there was no transition. When I was privileged to meet my late wife, Rosemary, she was in the Legion of Mary also, and had a similar type of background to myself. So we sort of did Legion work together in the boys' club, and our life just was a transition then into married life later. So there was no area where I'd say that my faith was any different. The one regret looking back is that my education and my faith stopped really at school level. And that I never really had any great further education because my life was so involved in healthcare that every moment I had was studying healthcare, and religion took a secondary role in that sense.
Jesus was a healer as well. I've heard you say that, so I think you were continuing his ministry. You mentioned Legion of Mary, and you had the pleasure of meeting Frank Duff. Can you tell us about that?
I met him many times, yeah. He was president of the concilium, or whatever the highest body was at that time, and I was president. After I left school, I was president of the branch of our Legion of Mary in school, and as a result then we'd meet at the concilium meetings. And I also met him a number of times up in the hostel that he worked in.
Yeah. Morning Star or Regina Celli.
Morning Star. Yeah. I visited there a number of times and met him there. He was a very simple man. I always remember he always seemed to have the same jacket on. I never saw him over the years wearing anything but a dark brown check jacket with big patches on the elbows, leather patches on the elbows, and a very simple life. He rode a bike at that stage, went to the meetings on his bike, and really was quite an extraordinary. I didn't really appreciate at the time, you know, what an extraordinary person he was. He was just a person working up there in the hostel. You know, so I've very vivid memories of him.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Jimmy, behind every great man there lies a great woman. How true is that statement for you in your experience?
Well, I wasn't a great man for a start, so that's not true. But I had the most extraordinary wife, as you know, and you met Rosemary a number of times, and I was absolutely privileged to have the life that I had, because she transformed my life from the time I met her, in every way, and no one could have been more supportive and have given anybody such a wonderful life as she gave me.
And how do you want to tell us the story of how you met Rosemary? You were a young doctor.
You know the story well.
Yeah.
I was a young doctor in Kappa. I went out to Kappa a year after I qualified to learn and to be introduced to orthopedic surgery. And I was there a few months, and I got my pay slip, and I felt that they had deducted too much from it, mainly tax. Because in those days, we got, I think my monthly pay was about £20 for the month. And they had taken a chunk of that in tax. So I went into the office, and in those days, this is before the HSE, the office had two people working in it. There was a secretary manager, and there was a girl who was working in the office. And they'd been joined by a third person, a young girl, 19-year-old girl, who had finished her secretarial course and was waiting to be called to go into the bank. And I went into the office with my pay slip, and I sort of said, the two young girls were there, and I said, look, I have my pay slip. I think they've deducted too much from me. Is there anything I can do about it? And this cheeky little 19-year-old girl looked up at me and she said, did you ever think of getting married? And that was reduction.
And that was the start of something beautiful.
That was the start of our life together. So about 6 weeks later, I had plucked up the courage to invite her out, and 18 months later proposed to her. And that was the start of the most extraordinary life that you could imagine.
Wow. And I've had the privilege of knowing Rosemary, and I agree completely. She was an extraordinary woman.
Yeah, she was.
What advice do you think Rosemary would give to a young couple starting out in marriage?
I think that she would say the most important aspect of a happy marriage is unselfishness. If you had to take one aspect alone. And she was forever thinking of me and subsequently the children. She was the most unselfish person you could imagine. And I think, to me, selfishness nowadays in marriage is a huge problem, because you very often have the husband or wife wanting to go their own way, do their own thing. They don't really fully consider the importance of consideration for their spouse. So I would think she would put that top of her list. I think that there are other qualities that I think she would stress. I think humor is a very important element of life too. That life itself is very serious in so many aspects, but a bit of humor in life, particularly with the children, can break down a lot of tense moments. And she had a great sense of fun about her life always. And I think that was a great quality, as well as a very deep faith. And I think she would encourage any young couple to nurture their faith and to be unselfish.
And just go back to this is leading on to another question, going back to yourself as a teenager, was there ever a point where you were going through a rebellious stage, or was that just not a thing back then?
That wasn't for consideration then. You know, it never arose. We had a very happy home, and as teenagers, we desired for nothing. But in those days, as I said, life was very simple. And I started gardening as a teenager, and I enjoyed sort of the garden. I wasn't great at sport. I played tennis, but I gave up rugby at an early stage. I didn't like the hustle and bustle of rugby. And I sort of led more of a lone type life rather than a team player. I enjoyed tennis, and there was no reason for any of us to be rebellious in any way, because we were privileged in the life we had at home, and with the love that our parents bestowed on us. So I find it hard to understand the rebellious aspect of children, and I'm so pleased that when I look back at my own 4 children, there was no question of any rebellious aspect. They all had a great go about them, bunk about them, but I couldn't ever say there was any of rebellion.
If I know with ours, like we've 7, and some of them go through it more than others, but there's a point where they get shirty, for want of a better way of putting it, and they just have a little bit of attitude that, we talk to them and try and work it out. And it might take weeks, it might take months. What advice would you give to your own 4 children as their children, if they go through some small teenage rebellion? What advice would you give to them?
I'm not rebellion. I think that's sort of just children maturing rather than rebellion. And I think that the advice would be to listen to them and to talk to them, and again to have a bit of a sense of fun about it too. Rosemary had a policy in life that she's called silent action. That you didn't react to the kids if they did something bold. You didn't react to it. That you actually remained silent if you could hold your tongue. And it was a great quality, really. And it actually paid great dividends. And very occasionally, if there was some problem with the kids, she'd leave a little note on their bed for them to read, rather than addressing them directly. She'd just leave a little note saying, I didn't like your behavior today. You might consider it. And it was a very subtle way of going about things. I often remember too that if they were out late when they were teenagers, and we were in bed and they hadn't arrived in home, Rosemary would give me a nudge and say, "Out we get." So out in my pajamas, I throw my coat over it, and we get into the car together, and we go and track them down wherever they were. They were usually quite close, maybe on the road or coming back from a disco or something. And we'd just pull up the car and open the door, and she never said a word. She
Mm-hmm.
just, and they'd be mustering about getting into the car of their parents,
Mm-hmm.
them
Mm-hmm.
up, and she just opened the door for the car, leave them in, and we'd go home and not a word, and we'd go up to bed again. And it actually worked wonders.
Mm-hmm.
As a result, after doing that a few times, they didn't want to be picked up in front of their friends.
Mm-hmm.
So it sort of
Good,
put an
good
end to it
idea.
pretty quickly.
We've been
So again,
together
it
in
was
the, sorry?
silent action. Again, it was silent
Silent
action.
action, yeah. It's funny.
So
I've heard that story before, and I've made a mental note to actually put it into practice, and I always forget. But we're together now in the house for 2 months, and there was occasion where I had to write a note, and I did what Rosemary did, and the effect of it was very powerful.
but the effect was very powerful. Well, there was one time when one of our kids did well at school or something, and Rosemary wrote a note and put a fiver or something in with the note.
Mm-hmm.
And when the boy came home from school, Rosemary said, I wrote up in your bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
And he muttered and he said, "Oh God, what's this about now?" So he went up, surprised, he got a nice note and a few pounds.
Very good.
Yeah. So
Very good.
I think that silent action, actually, when you look back, was most effective.
Yeah.
You know, that as a result, I never heard Rosemary raise her voice all her life.
Fantastic.
There was never a confrontation with the kids because she had that ability not to sort of raise her voice.
That's a very rare quality, and it's a terrific one.
Yeah.
So Jimmy, on to something else. You were involved in the Legion of Mary. You were involved in the Gaddis, Carja, different. You've been involved more recently with Alpha, the Alpha program in the parish. Why do you think those things are important, and isn't just going to mass on Sunday enough? So I'm asking you the question in a reverse way, sort of thing.
Yeah, but they're very important. I think that take something like Legatus now. Legatus was a religious organization for business people to try and propagate Christian values in their businesses. And it was started by an American called Tom Monaghan, and they came to Ireland about 18 or 19 years ago. And I was at their inaugural meeting, and I liked the concept of introducing religion and Christian values into business, because being involved in healthcare, I was very keen that we propagate the Christian message in our healthcare facilities. It was a natural thing to join the Gaddis, and I was delighted to have had 16 very happy years as a member, and ran the Gaddis myself for a few years as well. So that I never went out of my way looking for things, but if things were put in front of me, and in fact, Rose and myself voted a policy that if anyone ever got on to us, we always met them and listened to what they had to say, because you always learn in life from other people. And it's extraordinary what you learn if you stand back and listen. And I think we always put emphasis on that in life. And as a result, then various things came our way, and we were privileged. It was the same with my introduction to you. You contacted me and said you'd like a chat, and that's how we met. So that, and I was so privileged to get involved with you and with NET Ministries at that stage. So I think it's very important that you're never too busy. You're never too busy to listen to other people, because some people push you off quickly enough. But I found that I've learned more from others all my life by listening than I've been able to give.
Thank you, Jimmy. I remember the first time you came up to Donegal and you were in our house, and it was you tell the story, and Rosemary used to tell the story about all these little faces peering out the window looking at you, and we had never met you or Rosemary, and we didn't know what to expect at all. We just knew you as the hospital people, and it was kind of like, it's that nervous feeling, whatever. Rosemary came in, and yourself, and she just diffused the situation so well. It was beautiful, and just relaxed everybody. it was a wonderful, wonderful experience, I must say.
Well, I'm delighted you had that feeling, because she had that ability with people that she put people at rest, no matter who they were. She had that ability to relate in a very simple way with people. And I remember the first night, it was getting dark at the time, and we drove up to your house. The lights were on, and there were all these little heads inside the windows. And we were absolutely enthralled, because that night you were entertaining, I think, about 20 members of NET. And Sheena had the table laid for a whole stack. We couldn't believe it ourselves that we landed in, and the effortless way that Sheena catered for everybody, and the atmosphere was just magic in the house. And when you invited me to get involved in NET, I said, how could we refuse getting involved in such a wonderful Christian atmosphere? And that was our introduction to it.
Thank you very much.
Your home was a great blessing to us.
You've been involved. You're an orthopedic surgeon, and you're at the top, very much at the top of your game. And I know you're going to, not say that or whatever, but you're very much respected as a medical person in Ireland. And then you're in hospitals. You started developing hospitals, the Blackrock Clinic and the Galway and the Hermitage. And some of your hospitals went on to win awards for best employers, among many other things that they achieved. But in terms of the people that you work with, I think you had 2,000 healthcare professionals working for you at one stage, and yet your hospitals won awards for being the best employers, up against many multinational companies who had huge departments on how to figure this out. It just naturally happened for your hospitals. How important would you say the Christian principles that you applied in your work through organizations like Legatus had in affecting that?
Well, I suppose when you look at the Christian principles in healthcare, you shouldn't be in healthcare unless you're going to apply Christian principles, because healthcare is all about caring for the sick and the needy. And it's based on the principles of faith, hope and love. And to me, that's such an integral part of healthcare. And when you apply those principles in looking after people, you automatically create an atmosphere for those who are working in the place to collaborate with you. And that's how the awards come later. The awards are only something very nominal, and we never place any emphasis on them. But people who saw the way the staff collaborated and cared for people were very impressed with it. And as a result, we were sort of nominated as a particularly good businesses. And I wouldn't like to look at medicine, it's not a business, it's a caring atmosphere. But what better way to have a business than having an atmosphere based on those Christian principles? So that to me, it was always very important in my life that we would propagate the principle of Catholic hospitals going forward. So that there was always an oratory and a daily mass in the hospitals, chaplain and other people sort of helping as well on a voluntary basis.
That I think it goes beyond that, Jimmy. I remember a story that Rosemary told of where you had a couple of men working, and they were basically on maintenance, and they were looking after the rubbish around. I think it was the hospital in Dublin, the Blackrock, and there was some. I don't know if it's okay to talk about this on a recorded interview, but it's. Do you want to relate that story? Do you remember that story?
Well, I think the one you're referring to was in Galway. I was acting as CEO at the time, which I thoroughly enjoyed. I did it for 5 years, and after I stopped surgery, and I landed down one day because I was still living in Dublin, but spent 3 or 4 days a week in Galway and drove down. And the morning I drove down, I was greeted by these two men who were looking after waste management. And they said they wanted to see me. And I said, I'd be delighted to see them. So they said, oh, they were there to say goodbye. And I said, how do you mean you're saying goodbye? And I had actually been forewarned that they were having problems. So they said, oh, we've been just fired by their manager because they refused to carry some waste material from the laboratory. They said it wasn't in their schedule to bring out this drum of waste. And I said, well, that seems sort of fairly drastic action that you're losing your job over that. And they said, oh, well, it was never in our contract that we were to take this drum of liquid out of the place. And I said, but you know, that's extraordinary, because I knew one of them was looking after an elderly mother and another had a few young children. And I said, you know, employment isn't all that easy to get at this time, you know, and would you not relook at it? I said, you know, for example, if there's a problem with the drum, I said, I'm only down here 3 or 4 days a week, but I could do it 3 or 4 days a week if you could do it the other few days between you. Mm-hmm. And I said I could do it 3 days and could do it 2 days each. Oh, they said, of course we could. Well, they said, we don't want you to have to do it. And I said, well, let's look at it. And anyway, they said they'd be delighted to do it. And I said, that's fine. And that was the end of the story. So their jobs were secure.
And I think that,
but it's just a simple example.
Yeah.
When we had flexibility in our employment at that stage, none of us had a contract that specified what we were to do. Mm-hmm. I was very keen that everybody who worked in the facility, now times have changed because times have moved on, but I was very keen that everybody did everything if necessary. If there was a bit of paper on the ground, it was my job as CEO to lift it up, rather than calling for a cleaner. If I saw it first, I should lift it up and look after it. So that we all were multi-purpose. And I think that's an important element in life. Cut out all these protocols for levels of involvement in life. You know, leave everybody do everything. Nothing should be below any of us to do. And I think that's a very important principle in business as well.
Thank you, Jimmy. And let me ask you another question in relation to business. So we're now in a situation where there's 400,000 or 500,000 people who are receiving COVID-19 payment. Businesses are you know, their backs against the wall. They don't know how they're going to get started, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What advice would you give? You've been through many difficult times yourself in terms of, you know, your own business experience. And, you know, it looks easy in hindsight, and hindsight is 20/20 vision. But at the time, you had many sleepless nights. What advice would you give to business owners at this stage who might be interested in what you have to say and who are really struggling? They don't know what end up they are. What advice would you give them?
You know, it's very hard to advise them, because I feel so sorry for a lot of people nowadays where they, you know, where they're stressed financially. But I think the only advice you can give them is, one, to ask for the Lord's help, and secondly, to be patient, because, you know, time does solve a lot of problems. And if they can hang in and, you know, if they have a business that's worth surviving, it will survive. On the other hand, if they have a business that's sort of is problematic, it might be a good time for them to look at something else and move on. Because again, change in life is very important. And if you have a business that's struggling and has been struggling for some period of time, maybe it's an opportunity for opening up new ventures. And I would encourage people to look around and see, you know, is there something more exciting they can do with their life? And don't worry about the old business. Because sometimes we're in a bit of a rut at times. And, you know, sometimes we need a bit of a shake-up in order to get out of it. And maybe these are the times when people will look at it and say, look, but my life hasn't been as productive as it was running that coffee shop. Maybe I could do something better for people and go into something else.
Great.
Thank you. What's your feeling on that?
I would agree with you. My own experience is exactly that. I was involved in the family retail business, and I just sort of fell into it. I lived abroad in America, and you know, I'd made a commitment to my dad that I would join the family business. I joined the family business, and 17 years on, I was still in the family business, but we'd hit this recession, and you know, it was time to pause and time to think about, you know, this is my life. This is not a dress rehearsal. I'm doing something that is grand, but it's not something that gives me great passion. And I did somebody approached me about doing a master's in leadership and innovation in business, and I did that, and that just my thinking changed, and I started to think differently. And then the NET, I was involved with NET on a board like you are, and they approached me to go full time, and you know, we went full time, and we're so glad that we made that choice. So I would agree with you 100%.
Yeah.
It's scary at the time, but it's you know, it's that moment of craziness that will, obviously we're not going to be reckless, but it's something that there's an opportunity in this for everybody, and we will come out of it.
There is. Yeah, and I think life is going to change even because of the virus. Work practices are going to change. I don't think as many people will be working in offices. There'll be more homework, people working out of their houses, and I think there'll be people working in different ways as well. Just as we're talking now on Zoom, there's going to be a lot more people interrelating through technology. I think travel is going to change. People won't be trucking around the world for business as much as they were when they can meet people on Zoom. And I think it's a changing point for a lot of us in Ireland.
One last question, Jimmy, for the record. So yourself and Rosemary and now Michael have been involved in NET for 8 years going on. And, you know, this is something that you obviously see something about this ministry which proclaims the gospel, brings faith in a Catholic context to young people in Ireland. Why? What do you see in NET, and why do you continue to be involved? Why do you continue to back it?
Well, I suppose it was yours and Sheena's commitment to propagating the faith through the youth was what interested us in getting involved. And we were so impressed that you both were so committed to it. And we said that, you know, that there must be something in it. And the more we looked at it, the more we realized that the work that you were able to achieve with all those young people being so dynamic and so invigorated by their faith, that we realized that it was so important to get young people involved and to practice their faith, because in our own parish we just see people dropping away, sort of all that younger group. Once they've left school and go to third level, they just aren't practicing their faith the same way. And I feel if some of us don't get involved in trying to change that, we're going to have diminishing numbers as the years go on. So that we just were so much in admiration of what you were doing for the church and for the Lord, that we felt it was a blessing in our life that we were involved. I would love to continue to be involved.
Thank you, Jimmy. With your permission, can I ask you to lead us in a prayer to finish the interview?
Yeah, I would. I'd like to remember Rosemary particularly. We'd say her favourite prayer, the Memorare. Remember, O most gracious Virgin, that never was it known that anyone who fled without protection, implored your help, or sought your intercession was left unaided. Inspired with this confidence, we fly unto thee, O Virgin of Virgins, our Mother. To thee we come, before thee we kneel, sinfully sorrowful. O Mother of the Word incarnate, despised of our petitions, in thy clemency hear and answer us. Amen. And the Holy Spirit.
Jimmy, thank you so much for taking the time out to chat with us.
My pleasure. Right.
And God bless you. Good to touch base with you.
Right to you.
Thanks, Jimmy. We'll chat soon. God bless.